So panel 3 is really going to be looking at the role of empowerment and challenging how that plays a factor in both POA and different communities. So our first panelist is going to be Sami Shalabi. And Sami is a recent graduate of the University of Michigan. He studied the Arabic language and international studies with a concentration in global environments and health. In the future, Sami hopes to attend dental school and ultimately work in Palestine as a dentist. He's going to be talking about the role of Palestine in empowerment and linking that back to South Africa and POA. And then we have Harleen Kaur. And Harleen is also a recent graduate of the University of Michigan. She has a BA in English and a minor in Community Action and Social Change. This fall, she will be embarking on an 8-month solo travel around the world as a Bonderman Fellow. Upon her return, Harleen would like to pursue a joint degree in law and public policy. She'll be talking about the role of empowerment and POA engaging in communities in Ann Arbor. So we can welcome our panelists.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good? Cool. So, welcome everyone. Again, I will be talking about empowerment, challenging the idea of empowerment in Palestine, and comparing and contrasting the Palestinian struggle with the South African struggle in apartheid time. Just real quick to preface this talk, I am the son of Palestinian immigrants, both my mother and my father. This makes me inherently biased. And anything I say, I will try to present facts only and let you all make your judgments, but that's just something I have to say. And lots of things that I'm going to be talking about, people have dissertations on them. So if anything is vague, that is completely my fault. And the fact that I'm giving this talk for the second week in a row means you might have to listen to my bad jokes again. Okay. So, talking about the struggle a little bit. As Palestinians, struggle is not something you just do. It is a part of who you are. You can see this in the demonstrations, in protesting, in singing, in clothing. This existence is resistance mentality is displayed through our kufiyas, through the songs that we sing to each other, the way we interact with each other. And showing our presence and being out there is just something that we have to do. That's the way we don't stay silent, because when you are silent, you give voice to the oppressors. So just to get to this definition of empowerment, what is empowerment? Empowerment is the transfer of power from one source to the other. This can be from people, from reading, from any source of education. When we teach Nisha's module, we empower these students because they understand the module, they put their own spins on it, they teach it back because they now have ownership of this module. You can contrast this to some of the harder classes we take at school where, like organic chemistry and biochemistry, these classes kind of empower us, or me at least. They owned us and I didn't really get to grasp it 100%. So that's empowerment, and that's the definition. And think of that while I contextualize this Palestinian struggle real quick. I don't want to make it too much of a history lesson, so I am just going to give some context. Pre-World War I, it was more of a religious conflict. The entire land of Palestine, right here, 90% of the area was owned, if you will, by the Arabs and Muslims. There was only about 700,000 people living in Palestine around in the 1920s. And of this, there was only 70,000 Christians, 70,000 Jews. And during this time, there was two parties that were kind of growing. There was Arab nationalism and Jewish Zionism. These two parties became a stronger role during World War I. After World War II was over with, there was hundreds of thousands of Jews that were needed to be relocated. And the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine came up with this plan. They did this case study, and they came up with a plan to do one of two things. The first option was to split Palestine by nationality. So either just mix the Palestinians and the Israelis into one, well, the Jews, into one land, and call it a name that they were going to come up with later, but just to mix them completely. Or the second option was to mix their economies, but to split the lands up. The Jews wanted the latter option. They wanted to be connected economically, but they did not want to be mixed racially. The Arabs rejected both offers. So in 1947, they took this to the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. They took it to a vote in the United Nations. And they needed a 2/3 majority vote to pass this bill, Resolution 181. And it was thought on the first day that this resolution would have a majority vote, but not a 2/3 vote. So the Zionist Party did a filibuster, and it led to a 3-day delay in the vote. And after that happened, there was intense lobbying. President Truman in the White House was quoted on a statement that he said that never in his lifetime had he seen such intense annoyance and constant talking about pressure. Sorry. So there was pressure and annoyance in that 3-day span. They were lobbying up the vote so that they could get this vote to pass. And after that 3-day period, this indeed did pass. Resolution 181 passed, and that's the second set of lines right there after 1947, where it was split. You can fast forward to today, where these are UN lines, the green lines they're called, and these lines have been ignored. Currently, Palestinians own only about 20% of the land, and randomly there are eviction notices to kick these Palestinians out of their homes, to eradicate them, and these settlements that keep popping up are pushing them closer and closer to each other, and now about less than 20% of the land is owned by the Arabs. Real quick case study on the Gaza Strip. This is 145 square miles with over 1.5 million people. If you can picture Ann Arbor real quick. Gaza has about 10 times the population of Ann Arbor with only about 2 times the space. Think about Washington, Packard, they get filled up during rush hour. 10 times the population. In Durban, the Gaza Strip has about 3 times the population of Durban with only 55 more square miles. So it's congested. It has top 5 highest population density in the world. It is considered the largest open air prison. Nothing goes in or out, barely. It was estimated that about 45% of the people are at the poverty line, and that there's also 45% unemployment rate there as well. So this is very, very shocking. The UN Relief did a study that said that by 2020, this place would be unlivable. There is a need of jobs, water, electricity. It's all missing, and what needs to be there is humanity. This issue of the Gaza Strip and Palestine is talked about a lot in media. People know these buzzwords, but it's not understood. And again, the UN conducts all these studies. Seems like the UN is good at figuring out the problem, but not really resolving it. The boycott, divest, and sanctions movement by the Palestinians has been an effort to divest from Israel, to take away their economic stranglehold. And it's not going to solve the whole problem, but it will diminish it a little bit. Several churches have passed it. The entire UC, University of California public system has divested. Most recently, Princeton in May of 2015 has divested. Some of the differences between the two struggles was like the ANC. The ANC, by conscious people around the world, was viewed in a more positive way. The Mandelas, the Contradas, these were the proactive thinkers. But with the Palestinian struggle, Fatah, Hamas, these are the unofficial ruling bodies of the West Bank areas. These are not viewed favorably by the rest of the world because of the way the media portrays them. The United States has declared both of these as terrorist organizations. And whether I agree with them or not, it takes away from the existence as resistance mentality that I was talking about earlier. It diminishes them as just terrorists, and all they're mainly trying to do is protect their own. When you have limited options, there's not much that you can do besides protecting your own. South African apartheid, at its most basic principle, was a means of economic exploitation of gold, of diamonds, of other natural resources here in South Africa. In Palestine, it's been more of an ethnic cleansing. I'm going to read you a quote. The Palestinians are an invented people and want to destroy Israel. This was by Newt Gingrich in the 2012 presidential race, so I guess we missed out on that one. Another way that they're trying to take away from the Palestinians is by stealing food. Hummus is now considered an Israeli food. By taking our clothing, the kufiyas that I was talking about earlier, these are considered Israeli inventions, and that's a way that they're trying to implement and erase these Palestinians off the map and implement their own culture. Statements like this for people that don't know much about the struggle, this is a way to enforce a new culture, to make people think differently, and over time, this will change the way Palestinians are viewed, especially by uneducated people. So real quick, getting back to this empowerment and the limits of empowerment. Empowerment is transferring any source of power from one thing to another. We talk about Nisha's module. If I were to take Nisha's module and take it to a primary school just like Charles Hugo in the Gaza Strip or anywhere in the West Bank and teach it to the children and have them teach it back, they are now empowered over this module. But they are not empowered people because they are restricted by everything that Israel has restricted them in. They are in a chokehold. There is nothing there for them. The power has been taken from them. And they cannot seize it back unless the module can't give it back to them. I don't want to talk about how they can get it back. That's a different talk for a different time. Nico said the most potent weapon of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. They are changing the culture. They are changing the way these children are born into oppression, into poverty. So this is the expectation now. They cannot get this freedom back without this consciousness, without the existence as resistance mentality. And with every passing generation, this is something that is diminishing. The sad realization of empowerment is that you cannot empower someone in Palestine. There is no power to be given. They are prisoners of the system, and there is no agency to be claimed. Society has a chokehold on their freedoms and thus owns the power and the people. Thank you.
Sami, I think it's really important to understand the historical and cultural context of empowerment before we talk about it within the present context of the module. So thank you for that. I know that I am single-handedly sitting between you and your lunch, so I will try and make it quick. Essentially what I want to talk about today is, I guess, my sort of cliche experience with the module, but also the barriers that I saw with empowerment regarding POA due to that experience. So I was a part of the inaugural class of the Detroit Ann Arbor Ypsilanti, or in other words, the domestic experience of POA. I took Nisha's class in the fall of 2013, and upon learning the module and what the class was essentially going to be about, I immediately knew where I wanted to teach the module. At that point in time, I had been working with an organization in Ann Arbor called Groundcover News for about 2.5 years. And Groundcover News is a street paper. What a street paper does is it publishes a local newspaper, as any local newspaper would do. However, the economics of it are a little different. So the vendors of the newspaper are all a part of the homeless or low-income poverty community of the local area. They buy the newspaper from the organization for 25 cents, around there, and then they're then able to sell it back to community members as a vendor for $1. So they're thus making a profit off of this paper and ideally able to empower themselves through this process. So I learned a lot. Growing up in a very privileged socioeconomic background, I hadn't really interacted with the homeless community prior to coming to Ann Arbor, so that experience was really informative for me in that case. But what I loved about Groundcover was how empowering it was in the core of its organization. And so when I heard about the module and what its intentions were and what POA's intentions were, I felt that Groundcover was a good space to hold that in. As I said, I think my experience is sort of pretty cliche for what most people have. I think when I first set up the date to teach the module, I have the standard, as the quote we have on our t-shirts, I don't think I trusted the people. I had a list of all the phone numbers of the 100, 150 so vendors. And I recall, I don't think I ever told Nisha this, but I remember that week, almost every day I sat down for hours and would call vendor after vendor, begging them to come to this workshop because I was one of the youngest people in Nisha's class, and I was terrified that I would fail this class if no one came to learn the module. And so I called day and day after day, begging vendors, especially the ones that I had close relationships with, to come to this workshop and that it would be worth their time. And still after doing that, I remember the night came where we were teaching the module, and I was so terrified that I would show up and no one would be there because I knew Nisha was coming to watch. I knew that my group members had relied solely on me, and I'd promised them that I would have people for us to teach. And so when we got to the Groundcover office, and there were about, I think 5 or 6 vendors showed up that first night. I remember I was so excited, but also really surprised. And so I think that really taught me, as it does with a lot of people, about trusting the community you're with and trusting that they have the strength to take hold of their own situation. What was a little different for our experience was the struggles that we faced with the community we were teaching. As I mentioned, all of the vendors that we taught were either homeless or struggling to find a home or food, so they really were struggling to meet those basic needs. One thing that this reminds me of actually is a concept that I learned in one of my philosophy classes, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For those of you who know about this, it essentially talks about the pyramid of needs that humans need to meet in order to desire what is above that. So the very basic level is sort of physiological needs. So home, like a roof over your head, food, and after physiological needs comes safety. And this actually reminded me a lot of my experience teaching Groundcover, in that there were many times that we were trying to work with them on the module. This actually mostly happened the first night, where we were really getting into it, and then all of a sudden all the vendors had to leave because they have to catch the last bus back to Ypsilanti, which is a neighboring city in Ann Arbor that is a little more friendly towards the homeless community and more willing to provide them with free shelter. And so for them, they didn't have the time and they didn't have the energy to put into learning the module because their primary concern was housing for that night and where they were going to sleep that night. Another way that came up was that, again, being homeless, a lot of them didn't have the money to buy dinner. And so for us, we had to ensure, after realizing this, that whenever we were going to meet to work on the module, that we had to provide food for these vendors. Because again, if you're working on an empty stomach, nobody really cares about HIV, nobody cares about learning the module. So meeting those basic needs was critical in order to engage them in this discussion. I think the key moment of, transformation through POA came with the graduation. So as every time when we teach the module, we sort of have a graduation ceremony at the end, recognize everyone who was able to teach back the module. And this happened for 2 of the vendors who came through Groundcover. And I was particularly close with one of them, Joe. He's rotating on the slideshow here, so perhaps you'll see his picture. But Joe's mother lived in North Carolina, which is about, to give context, it's about a 4 or 5 hour flight from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Joe's mother actually flew in from North Carolina to see him graduate after teaching back the module. I remember they were both in tears throughout the entire time, and it was such an important thing for him. And in speaking with his mother afterwards, she told me something that Joe had never shared with me himself, that he kept mentioning to me throughout the process that he was so happy that I had believed in him, that I had trusted in him. And Joe's mom mentioned to me that he felt that this was the first time someone had believed that he could do something, and the previous time that someone had done that for him was his childhood mentor, who had actually passed away after having AIDS. And so this really, to be able to feel for him, I think to be empowered through this mechanism that truly hit home for him, I think was really important. But now getting to sort of the limits of empowerment, what I saw after POA was that, especially for, I'll talk more about Joe just because he's the one I'm closer to, but I think POA was truly simply a moment of empowerment for him. Because of the conditions of living that these vendors have, POA was not sustainable, and it was not something that could be continued on after the 2 or 3 weeks that they were learning and teaching back the module. So just to contextualize that, a few months after I left for the summer, and when I returned in the fall, I actually ran into Joe, I think in one of my first weeks back in Ann Arbor, and as part of Groundcover, when you commit to being a vendor, you're no longer allowed to panhandle or intake drugs or alcohol, because of a lot of the vendors do have addiction histories. And I actually ran into Joe on the street, and he was clearly intoxicated, had been smoking, and he told me that he really needed money. And I remember being in quite a bind because I knew that because of my personal relationship with him, so it was a difficult situation, but I think that sort of showed me that although we were successful in teaching Joe the module, and I think he was one of the most energetic teachers that I've ever seen, he truly took hold of it, we weren't successful in altering the condition of their lives. So it truly was just that moment of empowerment. And because of the life conditions that he was in, the empowerment wasn't sustainable. And so I think what this experience taught me is empowerment in and of itself is sort of a type of privilege. Not everyone is in the condition where they can be empowered and where that empowerment can be sustainable and continue to impact their lives. So for these vendors in Groundcover, they're continually fighting an uphill battle. It's not that once they achieve empowerment, it's a continuous state. It's something that they must continue to fight each and every day. And so I guess looking at long-term investment and how to change this in the future, I think that POA's current methodology is really important because HIV does impact these individuals, which is part of the issue. But in order for long-term success of implementation, the actual ideology of empowerment needs to be instilled on a day-to-day basis for these vendors. And so I just wanted to close out with a quote that Sami and I thought both reflected the limits of empowerment for Palestinians, limits of empowerment for the Groundcover vendors, and really anyone who is sort of facing this daily struggle of their humanity being oppressed. So it's on page 47 of Furry, but it says, "Freedom is acquired by conquest, not by gift. It must be pursued constantly and responsibly. Freedom is not an ideal located outside of man, nor is it an idea which becomes myth. It is rather the indispensable condition for the quest of human completion." Thank you.
Thank you to both of our panelists. Fantastic job. Because we do have lunch here in a few minutes, we're just going to open the floor up for 2 or 3 quick questions.
This is a very quick question, and it's just what is mental empowerment without economic empowerment?
That's a quick question.
So I think, you can hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I spoke a little bit about this.
I can come up there.
Yeah.
Better? Better?
Yes.
Cool. So I think I spoke a little bit about this. Mental empowerment would be the case study. the young boy or girl in school who learned the module, taught it back, and had complete power over it at their own disposal. But they're still limited economically. They still don't have the social and economic privileges of being that kind of empowered, kind of like what Harleen was talking about. It's a privilege to be empowered. So that's where they would be lacking in that aspect.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think that, and this is kind of what I was touching on at the end, that for Joe specifically, I think that, like Sami said, once they learn the module, they may be empowered over the module, but they don't have that full sense of empowerment. So although once the module is learned, perhaps Joe felt that he was empowered for a moment, but then when you step back out into the real world, again, I talked about this at Johannesburg, but when the vendors came to graduation, although they'd lived in Ann Arbor for many years, that was the first time that they'd stepped on the University of Michigan campus inside a U of M building. So although they felt that moment of empowerment, the larger society, the larger economics of our society did not recognize that their empowerment had economic value and it did not have social value in our larger society. And so I think that although I think the mentality of it needs to come first, I think like you said, I think the economic value of an individual is what our larger society perceives as more important.
Thank you. My name is Durban. I'm an educator at Collingwood Primary. Harleen, I can identify with a lot of things you said there, but just on the issue of Joe, we have the same thing at school. We want this ideal situation for the kids at school, but when they go home, they go to reality at home where there's drugs, where the parents are drug users, where the son has to go buy the parents drugs and things. But I think with Joe, I think some of the positives, although, I mean, for that moment when you all did the work with them, then they had to go back to their own reality. But I just want to say something to you. You may have touched him in some way. I work with patients at an addiction center in Merebank. Don't take this as, he's gone back to reality and he's gone back to drugs. You may have just touched something. The next time when he does slip, it might not be as low as that. So maybe look at that as a positive. It's tough out there. They have that reality for those few weeks of that empowerment, and they've got to go back to their life. Addiction is quite a difficult thing. So maybe just don't look at it as being all negative. There may be some positives in there. Thanks.
Well, Joe seems to be our favorite guy. Yes, Joe, okay. I would say normally you encounter the same kind of drugs that are used by doctors and, in all these approved institutions, being the ones that can be used recreationally as well in the streets. And if someone has certain drugs being prescribed to them by the doctor, it's not often that they end up being addicts, but the same person who, another person using those in the street for the same amount of time ends up being addicted. Maybe most of the addiction doesn't stem from rather the heavy use of these, but on the loneliness on their part and not being as significant maybe in the society. So my question basically was a very simple one. Did you give Joe that money and why?
So, yes, I did. I think for me, to be very frank, I think if it had been another vendor besides him, I don't know if I would have. I think a lot of it had to do with, so I started working with Groundcover as an 17-year-old when I started at U of M, and so I remember being very nervous, and he actually, over any of the staff, he was the first person to sort of welcome me into the organization. And so I think having that personal relationship with him, I think actually, so when he asked for the money, he said that he didn't have any money for food, and I think I really did trust that he would use that money how he told me he would, just because that's how our relationship was. I also, I don't know, I think, so hard to explain this without going into too much detail. I had a sort of intermediary role with the organization as an advisory board member. So there was an executive board who was sort of adults, people who had like full working jobs, and then myself and a lot of other graduate students or undergraduate students started an advisory board, and I felt that kind of similar to the relationship that an older sibling has with their younger siblings versus their parents, where you feel like you want to protect your younger sibling, but you also know that you have to keep some things from the parents. That's like the best way I can think to explain it, that I knew in that moment that that was what he needed, and I didn't feel like it was my role to like rat him out or tell the actual board that he had perhaps broken the rules or whatever, because for me in that moment and that relationship that I had with him, I felt that that was what he needed and that was the best way that I could help him.
Hi everyone, my name is Angela. I think I feel a little different about this issue than most people. What I believe is you can only do so much for people. I look at our Mandela, Steve Biko, and all those people who fought for us, for our liberation in our country as Black people. I work, I specialize in conveyancing, and almost every single day, if not every second day, I deal with a title deed that I have to draft where a Black person has bought a house and the previous condition was this property may not be acquired by a Black person or any Native person. Or this property may only be sold to a white person. And I look at that and I think, I work in a white firm. I'm the only Black person there. We've got four branches, and it's amazing. It's new for me, it's new for my family and my community. It's something that I still have to wrap my head around as well. But I look at how privileged I've been. But it's not what somebody did for me. It's about you being given the tools, and when the person is gone to live their lives, deciding to use the tools for yourselves. I think we make a lot of excuses for our failures, and we try to put the blame on other people instead of actually owning up to our mistakes. What you did with the module, giving it to Joe, I really believe he had a choice. I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. I mean, once somebody has equipped you with something that powerful, what you did for that group, it's up to you. It's hard, and I don't want to get into too many details, but I've been underprivileged. I've been without money to go to school, have to work 4 jobs, cleaning houses, making tea for companies, and I am where I am today because I made a choice. I was the first person to go to university in my family, and my mom died she had HIV/AIDS. My aunt has it, my cousins have it. That's where I come from, but you choose to be different. It's hard. Life is hard. But you make your own choices at the end of the day. And I think we should really step away from that mentality of giving people excuses and allowing them to shift the blame from themselves and actually say, look, life is hard, I couldn't survive, that's why I had to fall back on. It's hard, but you have to make it for yourself.
Andila, I'm scared of you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sami, I think it's important that, I think Ryan asked you a question the last time, and I want to reiterate that question, is that a lot of people want to support the Palestinian cause, but there's not enough information, education that's accessible to people. And that kind of, as Kate suggested, a module way, where it's easily broken down, you understood, and so forth. And I think that's part of the political organizing you can do outside of Palestine. Because because a lot of what happened in South Africa occurred outside of South Africa as well. I mean, that's why I'm here, because I was involved, not in a major way, but you connect to it in a certain way. So I think that sort of willingness and availability outside of Palestine needs to be really developed a lot more. And I think people like you and Palestinian immigrants in the United States need to sort of work on that. It's not just that's what's happening in Palestine. It's the diasporic Palestinians that need to be engaged in work that make people passionate and accessible. I mean, people who had nothing to do with South Africa were going and getting themselves arrested in front of various places. And you know, the divestment movement is very important. University of Michigan should be divesting. I know you're engaged in that, but it has come a long way from 10 years ago. So there's a lot of things that we could do outside.